Welcome, searchers and seekers. We are in the book of Samuel, and there are a lot of themes in Samuel that are important for Judaism and Christianity. We're getting into the history of the monarchy, the kings of Israel. So this is about the year 1000 BCE. So here we have in the first chapters of Samuel an account of the birth of Samuel, one of the first prophets. Prophecy in ancient Israel is a very important social and religious institution. The prophets were not primarily soothsayers, those who predicted the future. More exactly, they were people who gave God's judgment. So they were messengers of God, like angels, and they often start out with "Thus says Yahweh," "Thus says the Lord," which is a traditional way of messengers for kings and princes to start messages. So here we have an account in the first chapter of Samuel of the birth of Samuel. Samuel's father is Elkanah, and he has two wives, it says. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the others Peninnah. And Hannah has no children. So I want to pause right here. This is chapter 1, verse 2. Elkanah has two wives. The Bible doesn't bat an eyelash at that. It doesn't condemn it. That just seems to be normal practice. So the idea of monogamy is not an idea that is stated by the entirety of the Bible, which is in many ways shocking. You could interpret this in a couple of ways. If you believed every single word of the Bible is absolutely divinely inspired, it's hard to reconcile a text like this if you also believe in monogamy. On the other hand, you could interpret the Hebrew Scriptures in terms of people's attempts at understanding divinity and religion and themselves. And this is just an accurate portrayal of that. And then you could even say the Bible is bringing out where, especially from a Christian perspective, that people failed of their own. But that's a little bit of a far-fetched interpretation. Nevertheless, he has two wives, and it's important to note that sociologically. So Elkanah, the father of Samuel, used to go up to worship the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. So this is, I think this is the first occurrence in the Hebrew Scriptures of the term Lord of hosts. And it could be meaning something like the Lord of armies. So those hosts would be armies. Or it could be something else, a divine court, the multitude of angels. So perhaps hosts is a good translation. But I think, like so many things when we deal with the important names of God, we would like more information, but it's a little bit sketchy. Now, so Hannah has not had children. She's barren. And this is similar to many of the other stories in the Hebrew Scriptures. This almost seems like a literary device. A man with two wives, one has children, the other doesn't. And this is very important in the society to have sons especially. And we see the patriarchal nature of the society and the fact that the story is focused on a father and his son more than the wives. And that we'll see Hannah praised for a son. Not just any child, but a son, because of the patriarchal nature of the society, and that's important to note that. Verse 5 of the first chapter of Samuel says, the Lord had closed her womb. So Hannah cannot have children. And in this society, there is really a lot of ignorance of basic biology. People did not fully know how human procreation occurred. It's sort of a mystery. Why do some women not have children? Why are they incapable of having babies? and they were really unaware and ignorant of the causes of that. So it must be something to do with Yahweh closing the womb of certain people. Now, it is not said why in the text here, but let's pause and think about this at a higher level. Supposedly, Yahweh has the power to open and close wombs of any human being. That's an incredible power, and if God had that power, if Yahweh had that power, why wouldn't he just close the wombs of the enemies of Israel? That would make a less violent way of controlling the peoples around Israel. Nevertheless, this is what the people tended to believe out of their lack of knowledge of biology at 1000 BCE. So yeah, it was due to some sort of divine intervention, some sort of spiritual force was the cause of this, because there's apparently no other way of understanding it. It's a mystery. And so they filled that in with the idea that God closes the wombs of some and opens the wombs of others. In verse 7 of chapter 1 of Samuel, we have this very interesting statement. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of Yahweh, she used to provoke her. So there was a sort of a battle between the two wives. So she went to the house of the Lord, which is very interesting because the later tradition will say when the temple was built in Jerusalem that there was no house of Yahweh anywhere else. But here we seem to have a direct contradiction of that. There was a temple for Yahweh in Shiloh. And this is about the year 1000 if we accept this as a literal historical account. So Hannah goes to the temple of the Lord, it is called, and Eli is the priest of the temple. And Hannah recites this prayer: O Lord of hosts, if you only will look on the misery of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazarite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. So we've seen this Nazarite vow before, and Hannah is now promising that her son will be raised this way. So there's a lot of rules and regulations about being a Nazarite. Another one is that you are to keep clean and especially avoid any touching a corpse or being in a building that has a corpse that will defile you. So the death is fearful and defiling, and to avoid wine and not shave one's head. We saw that with Samson very famously. So that is the vow, and you could take a temporary vow or permanent vow. If you were somehow defiled on purpose or accidentally, the vow is broken, but you could make another one. So this is a vow of special religious nature, and we will see that Samuel is very special. He's brought up in the temple. He becomes one of the first prophets of Israel. So he's very close to Yahweh, very close to God. In verse 19, we are told Elkanah knew his wife Hannah. So to know means to have marital relations. And the Lord Yahweh remembered her. In due time she conceived, and she bore a son. She named him Samuel. Now, El at the end is the word for God, the generic word for God. And Samuel means something like he who was from God. So El as in Israel, Samuel, that El ending is the general name for God. That's in many of the other languages, where Yahweh is more of a specific kind of deity. So here is a note on the difference between Yahweh and Elohim. Elohim, El, is more of a general universal name for God. It's not a proper name, a specific name. And so most of the other languages would have very similar words for God. But in the New Revised Standard Version, we have this. The use of any proper name for the one and only God would be problematic. So Yahweh is a proper specific name as a person, John or Mary or Michael. So the idea is that there are many gods and we select out one called Yahweh. And that seems to be inappropriate. And so in Judaism, that the name of Yahweh was no longer said, mostly because it was considered too holy to be said. It was God's actual private name in some ways. But there may be a sense of that this particular God, with a proper name, with an individualizing name, was problematic. And so the editors and translators say that it's inappropriate for the universal faith of the Christian church, as well it is, because for Christians, God, there's only one God. There are no other gods. There's no reason to name God one name instead of other names. And yet that really covers up the fact that for the early books of the Old Testament, for the Hebrew Scriptures, God was referred to very frequently by a proper name, an individualizing name, Yahweh. And we have seen that this is more henotheistic, more that there are many gods, but we worship and are loyal to one God, God called Yahweh. So there is a proper name. And so to translate Yahweh as Lord really takes away so much of the meaning of the Hebrew Scriptures. And you really can't even understand the theology of what's going on in the Hebrew Scriptures if you cover over what the text very clearly says, that they refer to God by this proper name, Yahweh. In chapter 2, we have the Song of Hannah, and many scholars generally think the songs, the poetic, brief passages, are often older than some of the other written texts. Let's go through this Song of Hannah. Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in my God." That's very much like the Magnificat of the New Testament. So she starts it with saying her heart is exalting the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory. So this idea of enemy and victory. There is no holy one like the Lord, no one besides you. So is that really monotheistic? Is God just the best of all the gods, or really are there no other gods? There is no rock like our God. Rock could be translated mountain. So this idea of rock, God's a rock, a mountain, something solid. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord, for Yahweh is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. So the sense that God is involved in weighing the actions of people on earth. The bows of the mighty are broken. So think of bows as in bows and arrows. But the feeble gird on strength. So this is idea of reversal of fortunes, and this we will see in many other places, and especially in the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus and in the New Testament, that God is the God of the underdog, the God of the weak. Those who are full have hired themselves out for bread. So they had to get a job, a menial job, just to buy bread. Those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. So like herself being barren, she has now had a child. Yahweh kills and brings to life. So in a sense, yeah, Yahweh kills and brings to life, literally and also throughout all creation. God is the God of this process. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. So Sheol, this sort of indistinct afterworld where everyone goes to. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust, he lifts the needy from the ash heap. So wow, we're really getting in this song of Hannah something so different than the warrior god, and although that's included here as well, we're really getting something very different here. There's some theology here, some psychology, some hope for the downtrodden. He lifts the needy up from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are Yahweh's, and on them he has set the world. So the idea of creation, that the pillars of the earth, so in the sense of a building being held up by pillars or foundation, God has set them, Yahweh has set them, and the world is upon these pillars of creation. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones. The Lord, Yahweh, his adversaries shall be shattered. The Most High, this is verse 10, will thunder in heaven. So the Most High is yet another name for God. It's Eli in Hebrew, but it's not the same root as El and Elohim. So it's a different word. And the Most High will thunder in heaven. So thunder, in many ways, there's imagery of Yahweh as God of the thunderstorm going into battle. And you can imagine why that would be the case, because if you didn't know what thunderstorms were, you could easily imagine that they were Yahweh coming in person or God coming in person. So a storm god, a warrior god, very frightening, powerful, the lightning bolts that burn up trees and kill people. And so that is probably what's a little bit hinted at here, the thunder of the storm god and the warrior god. The Lord Yahweh will judge the ends of the earth. So the idea that there's a judgment, he will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed. So the king is the one who is anointed. And so why is Hannah singing this song about the king? She's she's given birth to Samuel. And why is she mentioning a king? Well, in part, this song could have been created later, and it could have been used as part of the worship in the temple when there were kings. Nevertheless, there's a lot of theology in the Song of Hannah. So Hannah leaves her son at the temple. Eli is the chief priest there. His sons are corrupt, and they are condemned. A man of God in chapter 2, verse 27, gives God's judgment. So it's interesting that, if this is a historical account, that we don't even have the name of someone who could condemn the high priest. And in general, we don't know the historicity of any of this that has happened per se. But even if it's not completely historical, we do learn what the culture was like. So even if we don't know there was exactly a woman named Hannah, we do know that sons were generally valued more than daughters, and we do hear the mention of the temple at Shiloh. So we do learn a lot, even if it's not historical. The two sons of Eli shall die on the same day, so a swift judgment is coming to them. So we have in chapter 3 this very memorable story of Samuel, young boy, being brought up in the temple. He's by the ark of God in verse 3. So the ark of God, or the ark of the covenant, was a gold box with two angels on the top, and as if God could be present on the top of the ark of the covenant. And Samuel hears someone calling to him. At first, he thinks it's Eli, but it isn't. It's God. God gives him the message that he's going to condemn the house of Eli for the sins of his sons, which is sort of an awkward position, right? If you're a young boy in the temple and the other priests are the son of the high priest, and you have this message from God that God's going to destroy the house. But Eli accepts it as the word of the Lord. Samuel grew up. The Lord was with him. Yahweh was with him. And all of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. So he is now a prophet of Yahweh. Dan to Beersheba. Dan is in the north. Beersheba is in the south. So all of the tribes are said to know Samuel as a prophet. Although we don't know if any of this is historical, as I've said, what is historical is the Philistines were there and they were very strong. They were on the coast of the Mediterranean, and they had probably come from somewhere in the Aegean, somewhere in the Mediterranean, and settled probably in the years 1500, 1400, 1300, up to 1000. And they were very strong. They had iron tools, and they were constantly at war with Israel. And so what the text is telling us here is actually probably very historically accurate. Whether the account that we're going to be reading about the wars here in the first chapters of Samuel is true, that's a different story. So they are not doing so well against the Philistines. And the elders of Israel said, they gathered and said, but it's interesting that if we're having a historical text, the elders of Israel are not even named. So one would think that the actual military rulers and the generals would be mentioned. So that's an amazing fact that they are not mentioned. Because if this was historical, you would really think those are decision makers. But in any case, they were routed, and they said, well, why don't we bring the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh here from Shiloh, so that he may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. So let's bring in the Ark of the Covenant. The idea God sort of rides on top of the angels on top of this gold box that's carried by poles. And the idea may be that's a real morale boost. We say the Israelites will be shouting, and they have a God on their side, but they fought and Israel was defeated. And there was a slaughter of maybe 30,000, and who knows how accurate those figures are. And the Ark of God was captured. So the Ark of God was captured by the Philistines. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. And that fulfills the prophecy of the previous chapter, chapter 234, that you shall see both of your sons die in the same day. So very gruesome. So the Philistines have the Ark of the Covenant, but they take it back into their territory. They don't just destroy it, because now they've got the Ark of a God. And so it makes sense, it's gold, they're going to keep it and preserve it, but we'll see what happens soon to them. Now, Eli is told about the defeat, the death of his sons, and that the Ark of God has been taken. He falls over backward and he dies. He had judged Israel for 40 years. So he is now dead. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, Phinehas is also dead. She is pregnant and she gives birth. She names the son Ichabod, as in Ichabod Crane, meaning the glory has departed from Israel. What a story with the names. Most names, personal names in Hebrew, have a meaning, unlike many modern languages where we have pretty much forgotten any sort of literal meaning to names. They're just a name that sounds good to our ears, that's popular, but in the Hebrew scriptures, most of the names for people and towns actually had a direct meaning in Hebrew. So in this sense, Ichabod means the glory has departed Israel. In chapter 5 of 1 Samuel, we see this very interesting story. The Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant, this gold box, and they bring it to Ashdod. And that's historically accurate. That's one of the cities of Philistia. Um, and they put it in the house of Dagon. That's accurate too. That is one of the main gods. And they sort of place it, they figure, let's place it in the temple with our other gods. So we've got a collection of gods, which is very much the sort of the humans controlling God versus the other way around. But nevertheless, now they got two gods. They've got these two emblems of the two societies. So that's a very powerful statement at a military level, at a sociological level. You know, we've got your gods, we've got your flag. We have control of what is most precious to you, and it's in our temple now. But the next morning when they come in, Dagon, the statue, the stone statue, most likely stone, fell on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord, as if he's worshiping Yahweh. Oh, well, so that's sort of saying who's the better God. They put Dagon back, but the next morning he has his arms and legs chopped off. They're put on the threshold, and only the trunk was left. So amazing story. Probably not historical, right? And so they want to get rid of the ark. They don't want to just destroy it. They don't want to get in worse trouble. So they want to give it back to the Israelites. And they do. And they are forced to give it back. There's also plagues. The cities are plagued. Probably bubonic plague, we might guess. So that could be historical as well. So capturing the Ark of the Covenant seemed like such a great boon, but it's actually a curse. And they want to give it back, but they are required by the Israelites to give it back with 5 gold tumors from the plague as a reminder of that, and 5 gold mice. So in a sense, they seem to know that whatever plague they had came from rodents. So they bring it back to Israel, and there's one town where it lands, where some of the descendants of Jeconiah, did not rejoice with the people of Beth Shemesh when the Ark of the Covenant came back. So God slaughters 70 of them, just because they didn't rejoice when the Ark came back. So this is serious business, this religion. This is sort of a characteristic of Yahweh, killing people who don't respect him, who don't worship him, who don't rejoice that the ark is coming back. So this is very, very serious. And I think to our modern ears, that may be very difficult to hear, and that doesn't seem consistent with a modern religion. It doesn't seem consistent with a theology where God is a perfect love who, as we saw in the Song of Hannah, lifts up the weak and the poor.